evening to you. Welcome to KTN Weekend Prime. This is the point of news on this 9th day of November 2014. My name is Yvonne Okwara.
And I'm John Alanamu. We've got lots lined up for you tonight. Lots of stuff to discuss, of course, on Checkpoint, Yvonne. Isn't that right?
Indeed, it's an interesting one. And just so we let you know before we go, for our sign language interpreter tonight is William Silla. And yes, Checkpoint is going to be extremely interesting. And I think now would be a good time to walk over to our super wall and just show you our big picture. And by now you are familiar with this term, prayer predators.
Yep.
John Alanamu is the man who's responsible for this title and indeed the story. John, you did the story and then left.
Yeah.
1 week of national conversation in every sphere and space of society. So here's a quick one. Every piece that you do is unique and different from the other. But when we were talking about this before this piece went on air, you said this one was different.
Yeah.
How so?
It was different in that I think we touched a nerve that a lot of people had been hoping that we would go and look into and look at. A lot of people who I've spoken to have said that we've always known that there was something funny about this church or that church. For instance, in the case of prayer predators, Salvation Healing Ministries. But up until the time we did the story, there really wasn't that concrete proof, even though there were some very good journalistic attempts that had been made prior to our story.
Absolutely. Do you ever think of the reaction that you're going to have? Did this surprise you? All radio stations in the country, it was on the headline of literally every newspaper in the country. I mean, everybody from shoe shiners, newspaper vendors, to people in corporate circles were talking about this. Is this something you anticipated or thought about or expected?
You know, as an investigative journalist, you don't often anticipate what the reaction of your work will be. You hope that it will evoke some sort of discussion. Right. We hoped that this especially would evoke that kind of discussion, but not to the extent that, honestly, not to the extent that we've seen it. And I mean, we thank everybody at home for engaging with this subject.
Right, and of course we'll continue that tonight, and that is the focus of our discussion on Checkpoint, and you're free to take a look and of course join in the discussion. The hashtag is Checkpoint on Twitter, 22155. We have religious leaders with us, we have a forensic psychologist, we have an alternative voice on the show as well. Just getting to the heart of this. Is regulation the way to go? The Attorney General is doing something about it this coming week, so we have lots to talk about on Checkpoint later, but that's not all we have.
Of course, we've got lots more, including Mock the Week. Of course, Willis. Well, I'm going to confuse him with Willis, our master. Right. Wilson Mburu has got a fantastic piece this week. I think it might have something to do with this. Yeah, as well as lots of other stories, including follow-ups on the tragedy that took place in Capo. That's all coming up for us on KTN Weekend Prime.
The way churches are registered, and if they are not registered properly, they are not systems and structures, they should be deregistered.
The government now moves to regulate registration of religious institutions.
Wahalifu, magaidi na wezi tutawaweka mahali pao.
The women and children have nothing whatsoever to do with that.
And criminals put on notice as leaders call for sobriety in resolving the crisis in Capo.
Also on KTN Weekend Prime, the people's president, or is it a campaign strategy?
And the intrigues and wiles of a sly preacher on Mock the Week with Wilson Mburu. Welcome to the program tonight. Now, only 1 week after KTN's expose on preacher Victor Kanyari, State House is tonight announcing that the government is working on a framework for the registration of religious organizations.
Earlier in the past week, Director of Public Prosecutions Keriako Tobiko ordered the police to investigate Kanyari for allegedly obtaining money by false pretenses. Well, could this be the beginning of the end of the prayer predators? Sharon Momanyi explores.
Na mwingine ambaye unamuona hapa alituma sadaka ya 310 akiwa nyumbani atatuambia ni wapi.
The damning expose took the country by storm. Makri ya Injili by Mohammed Ali on Jicho Pevu and Prayer Predators by John Allan Namu on KTN sparring headlines across Kenyan media houses. And the country's top legal officials are not quiet on the case, one that exposed how Victor Kanyari coached people to offer false testimonies as he faked healing and miracles. On its Twitter handle, the Presidential Strategic Communications Unit communicated that, quote, the Attorney General has proposed to the government a framework for registration and management of religious communities, end of quote. The unit further posted that, quote, a task force to advise on the amendment/overhaul of the Societies Act shall be announced soon, end of quote.
I would also encourage a task force to look at matters of the way churches are registered, and if they are not registered properly, they are not systems and structures, they should be deregistered. We should have like a catalog of particular things that should be put in place for churches to operate.
So many churches have mushroomed in the country in the past years, increasing reports of corruption and unethical conduct within these institutions occurring in their wake. Thus, the increasing calls to ensure checks and balances within the institutions of worship, particularly to ensure that the right to freedom of worship is not abused by fraudsters.
The church doesn't belong to the pastor. I am appointed to be in charge of the cathedral. I account on every shilling that we receive. And not just me, we have a pastoral team. We have the parish council that hold us accountable. This cathedral every April has an AGM that says this is the money we received, this is the way we use, this is the balance. And so Christians should go to churches where there are systems.
Places of worship are registered under societies in Kenya under the Societies Act 108. An applicant collects the forms from the counter at the Registrar of Societies office. The applicant then submits the filled-in form with a registration fee of 2,000 shillings. A file is then opened at the Registrar's office and is considered within a period of 120 days. Once registered, the applicant can then proceed with other establishments such as buildings, the leadership structures, among others. However, there are a number of churches that are only registered at the Registrar's office. They do not provide further information such as leadership structures or traceability. This poses a challenge in holding them accountable for what they preach or the activities they carry out. Church leaders point out the importance of self-regulation in the church. The National Council of Churches of Kenya is a regulatory body in Kenya consisting of 26 denominations.
I don't know who will be members of that task force. To me, religious institutions should regulate themselves. Like the Anglican Church is under the NCCK, there's an umbrella body. That if I misbehaved, there are systems that will bring that to check.
National Council of the Churches of Kenya ilikuwa na jukumu ya kusahihisha makanisa, na ilikuwa inaangalia hata taratibu ya mafunzo na hata uongozi na vile ule kiongozi ametayarishwa hata kineno la Mungu.
While acknowledging the need for a more stringent framework of registration of religious institutions, the Right Reverend Canon Sami Wainaina, provost at the All Saints Cathedral Church in Nairobi, puts some blame on the Christian fraternity.
I would like to emphasize more is about how gullible our Christians are. Why do they allow that? They know you can't buy blessings with money. They know this theology of seed has been used to manipulate.
The Bible warns of false prophets who it says will come dressed as sheep, but being ravenous wolves inside. Perhaps a strict legal framework will fight half the battle to ensure that these quote-unquote wolves do not make it to the pulpit. Religious leaders are also urging Christians to be more conscious of what they allow in the name of God. Sharma Mani, KTN, Nairobi.
And indeed, the conversation on prayer predators continues, and like we promised you, that discussion will be later on Checkpoint. But it is now entering a new phase, this discussion, regulation.
And that's a very interesting, very shaky ground as well, Yvonne. What the government intends to do versus what it can do, given that freedom of worship is very well ensconced and enshrined in our constitution.
That's right.
Where's that line?
And
where's the line between regulation and
freedom of worship?
Exactly.
What will they be regulating? The teachings, the amount of money collected? If it's the teachings, who is that authority?
Because every faith has their own authority, and every faith has its own text. The Bible, for instance, which is up on our screen, there's a Quran and other holy texts which faithful read from as their own sort of law in terms of the religion and how they govern that religion. So how do you move from that to legislating where religious instructors, religious institutions can stop? And isn't there already, or aren't there already enough laws that legislate in the commission of crimes? I mean, it's such an interesting debate.
So interesting one, and of course that debate is already kicking off on Twitter. Ominde Wawambura says, faith is believing in things that cannot be seen, but having faith should not mean we stop reasoning. That's what we're talking about, religion versus reason. Keep your comments coming in. The hashtag we're looking out for is Checkpoint, at KTN Kenya, at John Alanamu, and at Yvonne Okwara, and that discussion is coming up a little later on in this bulletin. But let's move on to our other top stories of the day first.
All right. Deputy President William Ruto says the government will not negotiate with criminals. Talking tough, the Deputy President particularly cited those responsible for fueling insecurity in Capo, Mombasa and Tana River.
Now, this comes as a section of leaders from Baringo and West Pokot counties have condemned the mishandling of the disarmament operation currently ongoing in Capo and its environs. KTN's Ian Wafula reports.
The launch of the Kikuyu Township Road construction project by Deputy President William Ruto early Sunday did not come short of matter security. Without mincing his words, Ruto gave stern warning to perpetrators of criminal activities in the country. Activities that have provoked public debate and left unanswered questions over the state of the country's security.
Ile tutafanya ni kuhakikisha kwamba kila mwananchi Kenya anafuata sheria, na wahalifu, magaidi na wezi tutawaweka mahali pao. Mambo ya kule Kapedo, mambo ya Mombasa, mambo ya Tana River, sehemu yote ambayo hakuna usalama tutaweka askari ya kutosha.
But even with tough affirmations by the Deputy President, mishandling of the disarmament operation in Capedo and neighboring Chemolingot and Tangul Bay shopping centers have come under sharp criticism by area residents and their leaders. An alleged raid by GSU and AP officers in the centers Friday last week left 31 people injured and hundreds displaced from their torched homes.
It reaches a point where what is happening is what used to happen during the colonial times. Collective punishment is a barbaric act. Flush out the criminals, deal with the criminals. The women and children have nothing whatsoever to do with that.
Further, a section of leaders from West Pokot, led by Area Governor Simon Kachapin, have threatened to disassociate themselves with the Jubilee government for what they describe as harassment of their people by the government in the ongoing operation.
We voted almost more than 80%, and we cannot be mistreated. We voted them so that they protect the Wananchi of West Pokot, they protect the soldiers, they protect everybody. But the same government is failing.
So far, a total of 19 firearms from the slain officers during the ambush have been recovered, while the government says a number of suspects have been arrested in connection to the ambush. Ian Wafula, KTN.
Let's take you to the coast now, where one person was stabbed to death and 3 others seriously injured during riots at Tononoka area in Mombasa earlier today. The victim was a lecturer at a Mombasa college. The chaos broke out at the Kikowani Muslim cemetery right after the burial of a young Muslim, Hassan Guti, who was killed yesterday in Mombasa. The police have asserted that Guti was a terror suspect, but are yet to track down his killers. Eyewitnesses say the youth were armed with machetes and knives and robbed people of their money. This comes days after the killing of an imam in Likoni.
He started beating me. One or two had sword. They cut my hand because I was defending myself with the left hand and using my right hand to fight. I actually fought them. But they managed to cut my hand with the sword because I was defeating them. That's why they had to cut my hand.
Kuuliza nini wakaniangusha. Wakanidunga fisu, wakaniambia ID na simu.
Chief Gears now, and President Uhuru Kenyatta is among a special group of heads of state that regularly interact with ordinary citizens, be it on phone or on computer. And this past week alone, the president has boarded a matatu and walked around the slums of Kibera. Political observers have intimated that this could well be an early strategy for the 2017 general election. Asha Mwilu reports.
From random strolls in Kibera slum to a quick ride in a public transport vehicle, President Uhuru Kenyatta has sold himself as the cool, tech-savvy and down-to-earth president. His uncharacteristic approach to the presidency has won him fans and critics in equal measure.
Uhuru is basically attempting to demonstrate that he is in touch with the needs of the common citizen and that he understands the desires and the wants of the common mwananchi. The only negative or downside to this is if that is all the president is doing. If he is not addressing the issue substantively through policy, through legislation and through actions that are expected from the head of state, and he's only wandering about, meeting people and so on.
Some have argued that these public appearances are mere PR gimmicks preceding a longer script to assure Uhuru Kenyatta a second term in office.
Yes, he is attempting to cut a niche as a president who is popular, as a president who is in tandem with the needs of his citizens. And of course, attempting to gain some political capital out of it, knowing that this is his first term, and perhaps in the next couple of years or so, we will be going to elections for the next term.
Thank you very much.
Uhuru's laid-back demeanor is, however, an old trick used by many leaders globally. President Obama once ditched his security detail to walk casually around Washington.
How are you? Can I shake your hand? Good to see you.
Britain's David Cameron has taken rides on the tube alongside ordinary passengers. And named the poorest president in the world, Uruguay's Jose Mujica takes the cake with his decision to live in a shack, drive around in a VW Beetle, and donate 90% of his salary to charity.
There are all sorts of extremes, and of course then you'll find other leaders who do not at all engage the common citizen. If you look at the Queen of England, for instance, all her interactions with the common public are choreographed and they're planned and so on. So Uhuru is somewhere in the middle of that spectrum.
By now, the ordinary Kenyan would not be surprised to see the president crossing the road right next to them. But whether this is a strategy to draw him closer to the common mwananchi or one to get him re-elected in 2017, one litmus test that awaits Uhuru Kenyatta is whether the lives of the ordinary Kenyan will be any better at the close of his first term. Asha Mwilu, KTN, Nairobi.
All right, from Nairobi, let's take you to Garissa. Elders there have vowed to ensure that girls from local families will not enroll in the National Youth Service. The elders say their girls are raised to be good homemakers and claim the enrollment into the NYS may deny them an opportunity to get married. Linda Ogutu tells us more.
Time. A new hope for a generation. It is Kenya growing by growing its youth.
This is the advert that has been running on several TV stations in the country. Its message calling out on the youth to come out and register for the National Youth Service. It's a calling that has targeted the youth from all over the country to apply for the training that aims to draft more than 26,000 youth by the end of the exercise. The Ministry of Devolution says it is a way of giving more youth the opportunity to fulfill their purpose by giving them a platform through which they can realize their potential. And so, just like in several parts of the country, the youth in Garissa have been turning up for that exercise that has some of the recruiters worried. There are no women turning up to be recruited for the training that many hope will give them a chance to be self-sufficient. Apart from this woman recruiter, several fields carrying out the recruitment in Garissa have only hosted men. The women here say they cannot enroll for the training as it will ensure that they will miss husbands.
You are taken as an NYS. It's like you cannot get a man to marry you. Yeah, it's kind of bad work.
The training is quite hectic for us ladies. From how we dress, like how I'm dressed right now, it's hard to train in such attire.
Young women in Garissa have been brought up and taught on how to be homemakers. The chances of not getting married and raising a family is not an option for many here. The few who would like to go for the recruitment say tradition and culture has crippled them.
Like when you're going somewhere like traveling, we need like someone who's related to you. Like we call them mahrims, related to you to go with you everywhere. And you can't like go for training and such activities with your brother, your uncle or your father.
It takes will. It takes character.
Their fathers and brothers are not keen on having their daughters and sisters join the National Youth Service. And so that has ensured that even the few who are willing are unable to go for the recruitment exercise. Elders here will hear nothing on the recruitment, especially for their girls.
And it's not our culture. Our girls are very expensive. They are very precious to us. They are like gold. We put them in the houses. We just keep them and save them in the houses. And that is the nature which God created them. They are the wives and they are prepared to look after the children.
For now, the young women in Garissa stay put as the recruitment exercise goes on, oblivious of the promise that such chances hold. Linda Ogutu, KTN.
From one cultural dilemma to another that's being broken, they have defied their culture to become the first ever female coxswains in Turkana County. This resilience has allowed them to provide for their families and also earned unusual popularity in their community. KTN's Mercy Kandie tells us the story of these two women from Turkana County.
Kila mtu afae life jacket. Kila mtu.
Before the boat ride takes off, Samal Julie is in charge. She is not alone. Samal and 22-year-old Judy Eleyo are the first Turkana female coxswains.
Alafu, in case boat ianze kwenda kutilt or roll kwa maji, usiwe unageuka.
The Lake Turkana waters is their territory. Here they rule.
And I trained as a coxswain. So my job title ni Marine Rescue in Turkana.
The wheels are clearly turning. Time for change is ripe as the two went against culture restrictions, venturing into grounds that was for the men only.
Katika jamii yetu ya Turkana, wasichana waruhusu na mambo ya bahari au na mambo ya kufuga ng'ombe. Lakini sasa kwa jamii yetu ya Turkana, wasichana wanaruhusiwa kukaa nyumbani, kufuga mbuzi nyumbani, lakini mambo ya bahari vile walisikia mimi nimeenda mambo ya bahari walishangaa sana.
Tulienda huko, tuliulizwa maswali mengi na community. Mlikuwa mmeenda kufanya nini huko? So tukawaambia tumeenda mambo na bahari. Sasa tulirudi huko tukawaambia hivyo, so walishangaa sana. Mbona mlienda hiyo mambo ya bahari na ni wanaume peke yao ndio huwa wanaenda kusomea hiyo course?
With a competitive job market, who could choose what comes one's way, they were taken for training in Mombasa by the Kerio Valley Development Authority.
The coxswain, 5 of them. We have 2 Turkana ladies who've been trained and 1 man. And these are the people we based in Kalokol. We also have 2 other coxswain who will be in Takwel to help the fishermen in Takwel Dam, also for rescue mission.
Nilisoma mengi sana kuhusu mambo ya bahari na sasa niko na roho ya kuokoa mtu na kufunza wavuvi mambo ya kujiokoa, mambo ya safety awareness in lake, mambo ya kuishi kwa maji, mambo ya ku-offload boat na mambo ya kutackle mambo ya tidal effect.
Today is one of the good days they get to carry the county government, an honor they say, ready at all times to save and carry out rescue missions.
This lake is heavily utilized by fishermen, heavily utilized by people traveling between Turkana and Marsabit, various parts of Marsabit.
Rescue teams to support and assist people who are doing various activities within the lake.
They love what they do, wanting to pursue their education further and encourage even more women to venture into new waters. The hope of the Turkana woman shining even more. Marcy Kandie, KTN, Turkana County.
Right, what an inspiring story about women breaking barriers. Let's take you from Turkana to Nakuru town. And there it was time to put the best foot forward as fans of Radio Maisha enjoyed the Rumba night at Summerland Hotel. Rumba fans were treated to a mix of African beats and tunes throughout the night.
The event, sponsored by Crown Quality Lager Beverages, attracted a huge number of fans who also had the opportunity to interact with Radio Maisha presenters. The organizers noted that the turnout was overwhelming as fans from all corners thronged the event as the Crown Quality Lager Beverage took the center stage in rewarding everyday champions.
Nimefurahia kuwa na wana Radio Maisha na nimeenjoy.
Test iko sawa, brand iko sawa, tunaweka kidole, continue with the quality, same quality.
Rumba iko sawa, iko chonjo, Nakuru namkaribisha sana.
Mafans kibao, nimefurahia sana kukutana na mafans wa Nakuru. Mafans pia wametukaribisha fresh tu sana, ama vipi? Na kwa hivi sasa basi, ukisikia background unajua kwamba muziki unaendelea, ni kumaanisha kwamba burudani is burudani, yani burudani bado linaendelea. Maana hakuna buguda plus mtafaruku isiko tukusambaratika, bali mambo ni ya kimbolea mbolea. Hey!
We are here sponsoring Rumba Night because Rumba Night for us is what we are doing, rewarding champions. We are rewarding champions today with the Rumba Night.
Na tumefurahia sana kwa Radio Maisha kutembea hapa kwetu. Tumeona sales iko juu sana na hata tumefurahia pombe mpya ambayo imeanza leo inaitwa Crown ambayo haijawahi kuwa Kenya tena, ni mara ya kwanza.
Tunaomba wakazi wote wa Nakuru, tafadhali muje Summerland wakati mwingine Radio Maisha na pamoja na pia Crown Pons wakikuja muone chenye mjaiona Nakuru hii.
You know, I don't understand how he gets paid to be on Russia on Saturday nights and then to go around the country having that much fun.
I'm telling you, he has
Washumbe,
too much fun. Yeah.
No, I'm in the wrong job.
You should come here and read the news for a few minutes. You can ask as we go
and
around.
Then you can go. It would be interesting to see us on Russia. Don't know, I think I have 2 left feet. Anyway, that's what's happening with the Radio Maisha fans, so be sure to catch them on their next stop. In the meantime, we're taking a short break, but we're back with Checkpoint.
Great discussion. You do not want to miss it. Very eclectic panel. 4 people already in here. And of course, Yvonne will be hosting that discussion. That's coming up. So stay tuned to KTN, the Point of News.
Welcome to Checkpoint. Looking forward to your feedback, so please use the hashtag Checkpoint on Twitter. The SMS number is 22155. Welcome to the program. Today we're talking about regulating churches in the country. This is, of course, after Prayer Predators and Makriya Injili aired last Sunday, exposing the work of Victor Kanyari. Panel tonight, we've tried to pick as many people with as many varied opinions as we possibly can, and yours, as of you, will be included as well. My panel today, eclectic gentleman, Bishop David Okende, who's from Christ is the Answer Ministries. Thank you for joining us. And also from the Evangelical Alliance of Kenya, we have Dr. Oscar Githua. These two gentlemen you saw in John Allen Namo's piece. Dr. Githua is a forensic psychologist and will be helping us look into why we get duped so easily in the country. Next to him, Reverend Dr. Robert Langatus from the Africa Gospel Church, and who's also a board member of the Evangelical Alliance of Kenya. Thank you. Dr. Makodingo Washington, whom we've seen before on Checkpoint, and who will give us that perspective from the outside looking in. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining us tonight. Let's start with you, Bishop Oginde. The government is today talking about more regulation. They're going to take a look at just how churches are being registered in the country, with an aim at seeing if there are any loopholes and how to prevent this from happening. What are your thoughts on government regulating the work of churches?
Well, the law already provides for some level of regulation. Once you are registered as a church, you are registered under the Societies Act, and there are parameters and guidelines that determine what you can and you cannot do. So in that sense, there's some level of regulation that is already in place. So I would say it will depend on how far they want to push it, how much further they want to go. That's when we could raise a red flag or say, yeah, that's good, because there indeed is a need for some level of regulation that would ensure that people do not just get into the system and abuse that which is already there. Okay. So at this point, I wouldn't say unless and until we hear what the government is up to.
Okay, all right. Daktari Langat, we talk about this, but then there's also the possibility of self-regulation. Many would say that that's not working. NCCK might not be doing the job it's meant to do, and hence the government coming in, and hence this expose that's come up. What do you think about self-regulation? Are you able to do that at the moment?
It's unfortunate that we've had to wait until this moment where the government has to regulate church, because the early church had self-regulatory mechanisms. A lot of heretics were pushed out of the church within the early church. I think there is a place for the government to regulate, but it needs, I agree with Bishop Okinde, that it needs to be done with a lot of care, because there are also issues of constitutionalism as far as the freedom of worship and religion is concerned. But the best mechanism is the mechanism of self-regulation, which unfortunately to some extent the body of Christ at the moment in Kenya is ill-prepared to provide those self-regulatory mechanisms.
So many would say then, because, and it, as you put it yourself, that the church has failed to regulate itself, and that therefore the regulation must come from outside. Is this, would this be a fair assessment, that the church has failed to regulate itself? I mean, Victor Kanyari's own mother was jailed for 2 years for just about the same thing. And it's surprising that this all came from outside the church, that this was an investigative piece that was done by a media house. What of those people who are now saying the church has failed to regulate itself? What would you say?
I don't think the church has completely failed to regulate itself. We do have organs such as the National Council of Churches that expect its members to subscribe to a certain mode of behavior in worship. We do have the Evangelical Alliance of Kenya, which actually the bulk of the Protestant world in this country is a part of. So I wouldn't say that we have entirely failed. I think we have come to where we are today because of the freedom of worship, But also, my point of contention is because a number of worshippers have shifted away from mainline churches, which normally have well-trained pastors in theology and biblical hermeneutics. That has been the undoing of the church. The rain began to fall on us the time we shifted away from those mainline churches with sound biblical doctrines.
Okay. All right.
And that's where we need to get back as a church.
Okay, and we'll come back to that because that's an interesting point. Dr. Makodingo, what are your thoughts on this, and in particular about, you know, the number of churches that he's mentioning? Just give us your thoughts on everything that you've seen and the conversations we've had over the past week.
Thank you. I think all the churches have problems. I think fundamentally, whether small, whether Kanyari, at the Kanyari level or at what we call mainstream churches, I think there are fundamental problems within the system itself, yeah, within the system of belief, within Christianity itself. But there are these churches that are in the middle. You know, there is the one that deals with the downtrodden, the one in my village, that has fairly good structured. The church doesn't collect a lot of money. The pastor keeps crying that if you don't collect much money, I don't really make any money.
It's not on a salary,
yeah, it doesn't really on the salaries. It depends on village support. Then there is the one in Nairobi, the downtrodden, but in Nairobi. You know, the nano evangelisms, the one that caters for the domestic house workers. Yeah, these are the ones that are filled with a lot of the miracles, because those people also happen to be people who have really lost hope.
Right.
So, you know, they have turned to be like politicians. They're selling a lot of hope. And when you sell hope, you'll always find people on the other side to deceive. Then there is the ones who have just escaped that level. They started there actually, but now they've reached a level where their pastors can afford to take luxury trips to South Africa to play golf. Yeah? The type that caters for the middle class, the guys who go drinking on a Saturday evening. Then on Sunday morning, they feel like they need to appease, you know, their maker and be right with him, and stagger into church drunk. Then there is the elite churches. Yeah? Now the elite churches cater for a very different group of people. There is that group of people who want to make it, so they'll go to those churches and they are taught the gospel of possessing, so they see big cars and they hope that one day they'll get those.
Right.
But then there is also the land grabbers, yeah, the political wheeler dealers, the big moneyed people who spend the whole week doing all manner of things, grabbing land and, you know, destroying public morality. Then on Sunday, they just want to go to a place where they'll sit, there'll be a bit of order, and where they can deposit $1 million shillings out of the 300 million that they swindle someone during the week. That is it. I mean, at the end of the day, that is the spectrum of the churches we have.
Okay.
They can't self-regulate. I mean, they have to be regulated, in my opinion, by the state.
Right.
Because they have such varied concepts. Even the doctrine is actually different. The Protestants and the Catholics have fundamental differences on the doctrine.
Right.
But you can no longer rely on the Bible and the so-called truth of the Bible to actually assist them to come together in a self-regulating mechanism.
Okay. We'll come to you, Dr. Githuwa, in just a moment, but I'd like you to respond to that, Bishop Oginde. And of course, talking about the many churches that are mushrooming and the Protestants protesting, and we all remember that from the Catholics. And now, you know, people are confused. Which of these main churches that Dr. Langat said we're straying away from, which ones are those fundamentally? Because I think it gets to a point there are so many. NCCK itself has 26 denominations under it.
You see, it's an issue of the regulatory structure, because the government already put in a mechanism for registration. And anybody, you can go and register a church today if you wish. There is no requirement that you belong to any group. So whereas there are groups like NCCK, like EAK and the other, these are voluntary membership alliances.
Bishop, is it time then that NCCK played a stronger role in the registration of churches, going to the government and saying, no, before somebody comes to you, we must first vet them? Is that something?
Then you go back to the problem of the Constitution. The Constitution guarantees the freedom of association. And churches are registered under societies, because a society is a gathering of people who have a common interest. So you cannot go that direction without violating the Constitution. Because if I decide I want to associate with this group that is here today, we want to form our own association, you can't say no. An external person cannot stop us from gathering to express whatever we want to express. That is the nature of the Constitution that we have given to ourselves. So it provides for us that freedom of association, that 5 of us, 10 of us, 50 of us, 1,000 of us, 1,000,000 of us can come together with a common interest, and we have the right to associate as a people. Therefore, there can be no mechanism that makes it mandatory for a group of people or a church to belong to NCCK or to EAK. It has to be voluntary. And that is where the problem is, because now there are so many of these churches that actually the majority of the churches in this country don't belong to any umbrella body.
There you go. An
They are
interesting
individual churches. They do whatever they wish. They thought this thing is working. Only to realize that they were being duped. Any right-thinking person knows that this is not a real pastor. This is not what is happening there is not what is happening in every church. So as far as I'm concerned, I don't think he has dented anything. Other than those people who are enemies of the church or who have something against the church, they say, I've always known that this is what is happening in the church. But that doesn't affect the church.
It doesn't affect the church.
No,
he's not capable of doing so. All right. Okay. Thank you all for joining us this evening. And on that note, Pete Njenga on Twitter says, I'm watching the interview now. I'm glad I am now agnostic. Guys, belief and truth are not synonymous. Well, that talks a little bit about what you've just said, but what are your thoughts? Continue to send them in. The hashtag is Checkpoint on Twitter, and SMS 22155. We'll sample your views a little later on, but we've talked about all of this. As always, here on The Point of News, we ask, what's the point?
Indeed, Yvonne, there always is a point of the discussions that we have on Checkpoint, and I'm going to start with a voice that was remarkably absent, according to quite a number of people, in this past week since the expose on Victor Kanyari, and that was from various parts of the church. One of the earliest roles of bishops in the Christian faith was to speak out against heresy. In fact, that tenet, in terms of speaking out against wrongdoing, is enshrined in almost every religion that we have today in Kenya and around the world, be it Islam, be it Buddhism or Christianity. Why is it that without there being an actual structure or institution that governs churches, that churches themselves cannot come out and speak out against the misuse of the canon and the misuse of the tenets of their religion? That was something that was absent. Secondly, and one thing that it also will be considered in coming days, is the review of the Societies Act. The Attorney General Githu Muigai has a very, very dicey situation on his hands should he choose to review the Societies Act with regard to the governance on churches by himself. It is, after all, something that could run counter to the freedom, to a very key right in our constitution, which is freedom of worship. So consultation there will need to be an important part of Githu Muigai and the government's review of the Societies Act going forward in the regulation of churches. But third and finally, something that has been said by Dr. Githu as well as other panelists today is that hope is one of the most powerful drugs, and if people are selling hope, there'll always be people to buy it. So why don't we all, including the government, get into the business of hope? And the government can do this in very simple ways, by providing alternatives to the people who are suffering under the yoke of poverty. There is no shame like the shame of poverty, William Ruto said in one of the speeches after they were inaugurated as president and deputy president. It is time for the government to live up to that promise and provide people with the kind of alternatives that they need, so that poverty, desperation should no longer be part of the lexicon of many Kenyans who would then turn to churches that would prey on their faith. And that is the point.
right, from that discussion on the church to actually something that he's still tackling. So let me compose myself and compose my thoughts. Okay.
All right.
So, chemistry is not the easiest of subjects to master, but as it turns out, in this very harsh economy, it can also make you very rich.
Someone say potassium permanganate. Anyway, in the past week, we also learned that due to these challenging economics, even the president has to pay bus fare.
Well, a very good evening to you and welcome to Mock the Week. And as you would expect, we'll be talking about my new favorite preacher and chemistry aficionado, stroke entrepreneur, stroke drama teacher. This guy, his name is Victor Kanyari, and the hard work that, he's doing to help Kenyans. But first, let's talk about this fellow, the engineer Michael Capo, who is the cabinet secretary in charge of transport. President Uhuru Kenyatta decided to have a new matatu route created because, he's president and he can do that. It's in the constitution. Go check it. The power to create matatu routes at will. Anyway, a new matatu route from State House to the KICC was created and passenger one took off. Here's the thing about matatu people, and this is what you expect of them. Even when you do them a favor, like say, create a new route for them, you don't expect those favors to be reciprocated. You still have to pay your fare. So President Uhuru Kenyatta dutifully paid his 30 shillings. But there was a small problem. Transport Cabinet Secretary Engineer Michael Capo was photographed by security cameras installed in the matatu, having boarded a vehicle that was already full. Why he still has his job, we don't know. Anyway, the president forgot to inform the rest of us that the route had been created for just one day, because we found this guy standing outside State House waiting for that matatu to pass by again. But only a miracle would save this poor soul. This was also a week during which people like myself who went to chemistry classes to daydream discovered that there is a substance called potassium permanganate. And that, if you play your cards right, it can make you this happy. Or even this happy. It was also discovered that the self-proclaimed prophet Dr. Victor Kanyari has long been doing funny business and being quite touchy with the women in his congregation who were not exactly his wife. Yes, this is Kanyari at his best, playing doctor with this woman's breasts. And what better way to check for pain than to fondle the part where the pain is being felt, especially if it's on the breasticular region. He then flashes his million-shilling smile to confirm what he will do to those things crawling inside them.
We'll deal with them circumfoniously.
Here's the thing. I honestly don't know why everybody is so angry at this brilliant character. He's just a hard-working Kenyan using potassium permanganate to make money.
Watu wanasema ya kwamba mapasta nwezi. Si basi wacha hata nikuibia mara moja. Kama nikuiba si wacha nikuibia leo.
That's all. He's just hard-working. And speaking of hard work, let's now talk about Gor Mahia.
We are the champions! Juno!
It was also a week when we also discovered that Gor Mahia fans can be excited without destroying anything.
The fans are static.
Okay, maybe I spoke too soon.
Nitoka kwa nyumba yangu jana mpaka wa leo sijarudi. Sababu gani? Nimependa ball ya Gor. Sasa nimefurahia juu tumechukua hii ligi na kikombe.
Baba yako. Hii matunda si adwale bwana. Hii matunda si mama yako bwana. Hii matunda ni adwale bwana.
We are the champions. Juno!
In all that excitement, it would not be difficult to understand why he wanted to drop his trousers. Here's some advice though. Only Kanyari is allowed to do inappropriate things in public and get away with them. Wilson Buru for KTN's Mock the Week.
Well, it's time for sports. I'm Lane Washira. And the 2014 Kenya Premier League champions Gor Mahia FC jetted back to the capital from Kisumu City, where they retained the title after a 3-0 win over Ushuru FC. Gor Mahia now hopes to turn around their continental fortunes, where they have registered dismal results in the past.
Gor Mahia arrived back to the city and received a heroic reception from hundreds of the traveling Green Army who had jammed Jomo Kenyatta International Airport. Motorists had a difficult time to snake their way around the busy airport as fans chanted. And with the Continental Football next season, club chairman Ambrose Rachier terms the win the sweetest because of the predicaments the team had to go through this season.
It has been a trying moment, one of the hardest moments of my leadership in Gor, because I have been chairman for 6 years. But this is a year when we did not have a sponsor and when we had to really rake into our pockets, rake into our friends' pockets to be able to run the club.
The team is looking to strengthen ahead of the CAF Champions League. And the chairman considered that it might not be easy to hold on to certain players like Dan Serinkuma, whose contract has run out.
So what we want to do this year is to do very, very good recruitment. Very, very good recruitment we are planning, but that requires funds. It's not easy to get a player unless you have the money to acquire the player. Then number two, we normally don't prepare very well at the beginning because we normally have a season which is different from other seasons.
This is the first win for Gor Mahia coach Frank Natai, who joined the Green Army about 2 months ago. And the club will review his contract next week.
Who worked very, very hard for each other, and whose form over the course of the last 2 months has been very good.
Gor Mahia's captain Jerry Monyango has dedicated the win to his wife and his 2-week-old baby.
Hiyo trophy ni kama nimemrudishia shukrani kwa ile support wamekuwa wakinipa. Wife anaitwa Jocelyn Lolim na kijana wa miaka 5 anaitwa Cristiano Chieng. Alafu sasa huyo amekuja juzi anaitwa Fabian.
Hassan Juma, KTN Weekend Prime Sports.
And to some athletics news now, just as Kangogo extended his local athletics series prowess by winning his 4th consecutive race. He clocked 29 minutes and 13 seconds to win this year's Safaricom Tegla Lorupe 10 kilometers race. Gladys Yator, on the other hand, beat stiff competition to win the women's race.
Pokot County welcomed over 2,700 athletes to Kapenguria for the 2014 edition of the Safaricom Tegla Lorupe 10 kilometers race that has graced the region for the past 13 years. Former world marathon record holder Tegla Lorupe, who founded the race, has continued to use athletics to unite pastoral communities around the larger Pokot. Saturday's race was flagged off at the Makutano Stadium in Kapenguria, where Safaricom Athletics Series leader Justus Kagongo was among the participants. Having registered 3 past wins, the 27-year-old was the pre-race favorite. He lived up to expectations and made it 4 wins this season, clocking 29 minutes and 13 seconds ahead of Julius Kalekem and John Loitang.
Hii ni race yangu ya 4 kwa Kenya. Nilianza na Chemasus, nilikuwa nambari la 2, nikaenda Machakos, nikawin, na nikaenda Madoga, nikawin, and then leo hapa.
In the women's 10 kilometers race, 3 athletes tagged to a leading pack for the better part of the race before Gladys Yator outsprinted her competitors to cut the tape in 35 minutes and 9 seconds.
Shukuru Mungu kwa kushinda hii race ya leo. Yenyewe ilikuwa tough, lakini nikapambana mpaka nikachukua number 1.
Athletics action will now move to Eldoret for the CAS International Marathon next weekend.
In hockey, Daystar failed to find the back of the net against a defensive Karate club in the Hockey League that saw the 2 rivals battle to a barren draw result. Karate had a goal disallowed in the first half with the referee citing foul play. Kisumu Simba faced defending champions Kenya Police in an even game that saw them settle for a 3-3 draw at the City Park Hockey Stadium today. Frank Wanangwe put Simba in front in the first half before Brian Saina leveled for Kenya Police minutes before halftime. In the second half, Brian Kaina and Francis Eshikon added a goal each before William Okech and Vincent Othiambo leveled for Simba. And finally, Swansea fought back from a goal down to beat Arsenal and move up to 5th on the English Premier League table. Arsenal had taken the lead on the 63rd. Well, let's just say that Arsenal has the most brilliant way of disappointing its fans, and that's how we wrap up tonight's edition of KTN Sports. Do have a good night. I'm Lane Washira.
KTN Sports in association.
All right, that has been the point of news, KTN Weekend Prime. But before we wind up, let's take a look at some of your feedback, rather. Eve_Madiga at Eve Madiga says, Kenyans should just be aware and avoid those who lead people astray. God will never charge for his miracles. But Yvonne, we know that half the story there is people are so desperate that they look aside, they'll cast that bit of scripture aside and just look for something that will give them that sort of solution that they're looking for.
You know, we were talking about it, and Dr. Gidua raised it on the panel. I mean, he said, look, you need to get to at that point in your life to be able to understand people looking for answers, people looking for hope, people looking for a way out, people looking for solutions. Until we get to that point, some of us may never understand what that lady who allowed the pastor to handle her breasts, you know, it may seem, you know, we all say, but how could they do that? How could they get duped?
Yeah.
But it does get to that point. And I believe there's a lot of Kenyans that feel that way and are despondent about life in very many different spheres.
Millions of Kenyans are at venture, in terms, at least in terms of the lack of jobs, in terms of the lack of opportunity and the desperation that exists in the country. That is really a groundswell of areas with hopelessness.
Which is why I liked what you said about the government should be in the business of selling hope. And I think we should be a little more hopeful. I mean, you know, having some of those positive stories. Here's another one. Peter Kiago on Twitter says, if the church lived up to its name, no suffering soul would go elsewhere. They lack it, so fraudsters set in.
And that's another thing that we were also discussing, and we discussed this on the panel. You don't need to have an organization that finger wags at churches that have gone astray. If there is something that has gone wrong, it is up to you as a person who is in the clergy, who defends the Bible or the Quran or any other religious book, to speak out against it. I mean, speaking from a political point of view, remember Bishop Alexander Muge, Father Kaiser. Those are people who for quite a bit of the latter days of their lives gave us a part of their lives and gave direction in terms of speaking out against ills. You don't need an organization to be able to tell you when to speak and when not to speak.
Indeed. Okay. All right. Victor Ateng, final one here, says Makodingo is giving some stinging truths there about churches in Kenya today. Some interesting thoughts that came up from our panel today. All right. That's it from me.
All right. Okay, and that's it for me as well. This has been KTN Weekend Prime, the point of news. Do remember to keep watching KTN Prime throughout the rest of the week. We've got lots more stories coming up in our subsequent bulletins, and of course more authoritative news and analysis.
Absolutely. Thank you for watching. My name is Yvonne Okwara, sign language interpreter tonight. William Silla.
I'm John Allen Namu. Good night.